Welcome to Twilight Fables, where the fairy tales you thought you knew take on a darker life of their own. Tonight, we climb the tower of Rapunzel, but beware, for this tower does not end where the clouds begin, and what waits at the top is not salvation. This is Rapunzel, the endless climb. The tower did not end in the sky. That was the first thing Rapunzel learned when she was old enough to understand what above and below meant. The tower stones, pale and veined like bones under skin, reached far beyond sight, stabbing upward into clouds that swirled and reformed but never broke to reveal a top. Even the wind seemed reluctant to climb too high, circling in mournful draughts that whispered through the slit windows. Rapunzel had counted the windows once, or at least tried. She had pressed her face against the glass, straining to see upward, but the tower bent in ways her eyes could not follow. It was endless, as the witch had told her, and endless things were not to be questioned. "You are bound," the witch had said, the first time Rapunzel had refused to sing. Her voice had trembled with defiance then, a child's rebellion, but it hadn't lasted long. The witch's hand had brushed her cheek, deceptively gentle, and the pain bloomed instantly in Rapunzel's throat, like 1,000 thorns sprouting inside her. She had choked on her own breath, clawing at her neck, while the witch smiled. "Do you feel it, little bird?" she had whispered. "That is the song caged in you. Try to silence it, and it will tear you apart from within. Better to let it free, better to sing." So Rapunzel sang. She sang each dusk, when the sky bruised purple and the shadows grew restless around the tower. Her voice drifted down the walls, golden and mournful, and sometimes, often, someone below would hear, a traveller, a wanderer, a seeker of beauty, or a fool guided by curiosity. They would step into the circle of shadow at the tower's base, look up at the slitted windows and see her. Then they would call, and Rapunzel would feel her hair tug from within her scalp, alive, writhing, eager to obey. It spilled down the stones like a river of gold, glowing faintly in the twilight. She felt every motion of it, the scrape of stone against strand, the weight of air pulling it taut, the eager clutch of hands seizing it to climb, and each time her heart would sink, because she knew what came next. No one who climbed her hair ever reached the top. They pulled themselves higher and higher, their faces straining, their muscles shaking, until they disappeared into the thick white veil of cloud. Sometimes she heard them shout in triumph as they breached the mist. Sometimes she heard screams that stretched into nothing, but never, not once, did she see them again. The witch told her not to wonder. "The tower accepts what it is owed," she said. "It swallows the desperate, the greedy, the lovesick. They go on climbing, and the higher they climb, the deeper they fall. But where do they go? Rapunzel once dared to ask. The witch's eyes, dark and slick as oil, narrowed. Little bird, do not ask where the river ends. When you are the riverbed, you are the path, not the destination. Rapunzel stopped asking after that. Years passed, but she did not age as mortals did. Her hair grew heavier, glossier, hungrier. Her skin stayed pale and smooth, her eyes bright, though shadows ringed them from sleepless nights. The tower fed her in ways she did not want to understand. Each climber stolen into the endless ascent left her stronger, though her soul felt thinner with every loss. She hated her song, yet when the binding twisted in her throat, she opened her mouth, and the notes poured out like blood from a wound, until the night she sang, and someone answered differently. It was late spring, though Rapunzel knew only because the air carried the scent of rain-soaked earth. The clouds churned heavy above, and her song drifted down through the veil. She tried to sing softly, hoping no one would hear, but the curse sharpened her notes until they shimmered like bells. A voice called up from the base of the tower, "Who sings with sorrow so sweet?" Rapunzel froze. Usually, the climbers shouted crude things, promises of love, demands to see the maiden in the tower, or boasts about their courage. This voice was different, calm, curious, touched with genuine wonder. Her hair stirred restlessly, the curse pulling at it. She clenched her fists, tears burning her eyes. "No," she whispered, "please, no." But the binding coiled tight in her throat, and her hair spilled from the window in a shining cascade. There was a pause below. Then the man laughed softly. "Golden rope from heaven itself," he said. "If you are truly a spirit, forgive me for touching what is not mine. But if you are a woman, perhaps you'll allow a weary traveller to climb." His hands grasped her hair, and she shivered violently, but something strange stirred in her chest. Not dread, not resignation, something warmer, something alive. The man climbed hand over hand, his grip steady, his strength sure. His face rose into view, young, with dark eyes sharp as a hawk's, his jaw set with determination. He did not look like a fool or a dreamer. He looked like someone who had chosen this climb, knowing it for what it was. When he pulled himself through the narrow window and stood in her chamber, Rapunzel's breath caught. No one had ever reached her before. The curse screamed inside her bones, demanding she scream, demanding she push him back, demand he climb further. But she pressed her palms to her mouth and held it in. "You're real," the man said, staring at her as though she were the miracle, not him. "I thought it was a trick of the wind, but you're real." Rapunzel shook her head violently. "You shouldn't be here. You must go." He frowned. "Go?" I nearly tore my arms from their sockets, climbing this far. "You're trapped, aren't you? The song. You were calling for help. No! Her voice cracked, the curse writhing in fury. I wasn't calling. I can't stop. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. What do you mean? She met his gaze, tears sliding down her cheeks. The witch bound me. My song lures, my hair ensnares. You weren't supposed to reach me. You were supposed to climb until you vanished into the clouds, like all the others. The prince, for he revealed himself as such later, grew pale, but his eyes never left hers. And yet I did reach you. Yes, she whispered the word like a prayer and a curse at once. And now the tower will notice. As if in answer, the stones shuddered faintly around them, and the hair tugged at her scalp, straining upward, eager to drag him higher. Rapunzel grabbed his hands, desperate. You mustn't climb again. If you do, you'll never stop. You'll climb until the sky itself swallows you. He smiled faintly, though fear flickered behind his eyes. Then let me climb down instead. Let me take you with me. Her heart twisted. Oh, how she longed to say yes, to run, to escape the tower's endless hunger. But the binding constricted her throat, and she gagged on invisible thorns. I can't, she rasped. The curse won't let me. The tower won't let me. If I try to leave. She touched her hair, feeling it pulse faintly like a living thing. This will drag me back. He studied her in silence for a long moment. Then he did something no one else had ever done. He reached out and touched her hair, gently, reverently. Then we'll find a way to sever it, he said. A curse made can be unmade. Even if it kills me, I'll try. Rapunzel stared at him, trembling, torn between hope and terror. For the first time in her long captivity, the thought bloomed like fire in her chest. What if he could? Outside the storm broke, thunder rolling across the sky, and far below, unseen by either of them, a shadow stirred at the tower's base. The witch, returning sooner than Rapunzel had dared expect. The witch always came without warning. Sometimes days passed without her shadow, staining the stones. Sometimes weeks, though never long enough to let Rapunzel believe she had been abandoned. The witch's presence was like mildew in the air. Even when unseen, it clung, waiting to rot what was left of Rapunzel's hope. But this night, with the storm roaring outside and the prince still in her chamber, the witch arrived. Rapunzel felt it first in her throat, the curse coiled tighter, an invisible hand crushing her windpipe until she staggered, clutching at her neck. Her hair lashed like serpents, snaking toward the window, eager to descend. The prince caught her before she fell. What is it? He demanded. She's coming, Rapunzel gasped. Her voice was raw, but the words forced themselves past the thorns. The witch. Even as she spoke, the chamber darkened. The torches sputtered, dimming, until only the storm's lightning illuminated the room. A shadow thickened in the corner, unfolding into the crooked figure Rapunzel dreaded. The witch's cloak was stitched from night itself, her skin waxy and pale as candle drippings. Her eyes gleamed like oil slicks, reflecting too much light, as though they were not eyes, but holes leading somewhere deeper. "Little bird," the witch crooned. Her voice carried the weight of centuries, layered with whispers not her own. "I heard your song, I smelled the hunger of the tower, and yet something is amiss." Her gaze fell upon the prince. He straightened, hand on his sword hilt, but the witch only smiled, baring teeth sharp as broken glass. "A climber inside the chamber?" she cackled, the sound scraping the stone walls. "No one reaches the little bird. No one. What have you done?" Rapunzel tried to answer, but the curse yanked her voice back, silencing her with pain so sharp she nearly collapsed again. The witch's grin widened. "Ah, you defied me. You used your hair not as bait, but as a rope of rescue." She flicked her long, claw-like fingers, and Rapunzel's hair writhed violently, tightening around the prince's arms and chest. Before he could react, it coiled like a serpent, pinning him against the wall. His sword clattered uselessly to the floor. "Stop!" Rapunzel cried, the words tearing her throat bloody. "Please, let him go." The witch tilted her head, regarding Rapunzel as though she were a strange insect. "You plead for him? How quaint! Did you believe you could love, little bird, that you could nest in another's heart while you still wear my chains?" Her voice dropped to a hiss, and the shadows thickened, seeping into the room like oil. "You are mine. Your hair is mine. Your song is mine. Every breath you take belongs to me. You lure, they climb, the tower feeds. That is your purpose. That is all." The prince struggled, teeth bared, but the hair only constricted, drawing blood where strands cut into his skin like wire. "Rapunzel," he shouted, voice strained. "Don't let her." The witch snapped her fingers, his words cut off with a strangled gasp as the hair forced its way tighter around his throat. "No!" Rapunzel screamed, stumbling forward. I'll sing. Just let him live." The witch's expression softened, mockingly maternal. "Good little bird, always willing to bleed if I squeeze hard enough." She released her hold, and Rapunzel's throat burned with sudden relief. The hair slackened, loosening its grip on the prince, though it still bound him cruelly. He coughed violently, gasping for air, but his eyes never left Rapunzel's face. The witch leaned close to Rapunzel, her rancid breath filling the air. "Do not think to betray me again. The binding is deeper than you know. Refuse your purpose, and I will not simply make you suffer. I will make him suffer through you. Do you understand?" Rapunzel nodded shakily, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Good." The witch turned toward the prince, her shadow swallowing him whole for an instant. "As for this morsel," she sniffed him, lips curling. "Strong, stubborn, he will make fine meat for the climb. A shame you wasted him in your chamber. No, Rapunzel cried, desperation rising like bile. Please, not him. Take me instead. Take anything, but not him. The witch's gaze slid back to her. For a moment, silence filled the chamber, heavy and suffocating. Then the witch's grin returned, slow and cruel. Very well, she purred. He may stay for now, but he is bound as you are. Should he climb again, he will vanish into the endless path, as all others do, and when he does, his suffering will echo in your song until the end of days. With that, the witch dissolved into shadow, her form unravelling into black smoke that seeped into the stones. The chamber brightened slightly, though the storm outside still howled. Rapunzel collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Her hair slithered back into place, lifeless now, draping across the floor like spilled entrails. The prince staggered toward her, bruised and bleeding from the hair's constriction, but alive. He knelt, taking her trembling hands in his. What was that thing? He asked, voice hoarse. My jailer, Rapunzel whispered. My curse, the witch who bound me here. He shook his head, anger flickering through his eyes. Then we fight her. Together, no one is truly unbreakable. No curse without weakness. There must be a way. She wanted to believe him. Gods, how she wanted to. But the curse thrummed in her throat, reminding her of its power. The witch's threat still echoed in her skull. Should he climb again? She looked at the prince, her heart torn between hope and terror. You don't understand. The tower doesn't end. If you climb again, it won't let you go. It will take you into the clouds, and you'll never return. Then, he said, gripping her hands tighter, we'll find a way to make the tower let go. His words lit a spark inside her, fragile but burning. For the first time in her long imprisonment, Rapunzel dared to imagine escape, not just for herself, but for them both. Yet even as she clung to that thought, she felt the tower tremble faintly around her, as though it too had heard, and was already preparing to crush their fragile rebellion. Rapunzel had never dared dream of escape before the prince arrived. Hope was a forbidden thing in the tower, a dangerous weed that the witch burned from her mind whenever it sprouted. Yet now, with the prince's hands still warm around hers, the weed pushed through the cracks again, stubborn and alive. They spent the night whispering. The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the walls, but within her chamber they carved out a fragile sanctuary of words. How long have you been here? The prince asked. His voice was low but steady, even after the witch's assault. Rapunzel gazed toward the slit of window. I don't know. Time doesn't pass here the way it should. The seasons change, the clouds shift, but I don't grow older. I think years, maybe decades. His eyes softened with pity, and it pierced her like a knife. She hated that look, hated being something to be pitied. but still she clung to his presence. "The witch," he pressed. "Does she always appear that way?" "She comes when she chooses. Sometimes she brings food. Sometimes she only comes to remind me that I'm bound. And sometimes," her throat tightened, "sometimes she brings climbers herself. She whispers to them, plants the need to ascend, then leaves them to the tower. She laughs when they vanish." The prince's jaw clenched. "And your hair, it's her doing?" "Yes." Rapunzel ran trembling fingers through the golden strands pooled at her feet. "She bound it to me. It's alive, though not mine. When someone touches it, I feel them. When they climb, it drags at my scalp, pulls at my bones. And when they vanish," she swallowed, "it feeds." The prince's hand brushed hers again, gently. "Then we must sever it." She almost laughed, bitter and broken. "Do you think I haven't tried? I've cut it before. With knives, with fire. It grows back instantly, longer than before. The curse will not allow it." "Then we don't sever it," he said firmly. "We unbind it." Rapunzel looked at him sharply. His eyes burned with determination, and something else, something reckless. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The witch tied the curse to me at birth, to my hair, to my voice, to my very breath. If it is unbound, it may kill me." His expression hardened. Better death in freedom than endless life in chains. Her breath caught, because in that moment she believed him. She saw truth in his words, saw the fire in him that no curse could smother, and she feared it. The next days, or weeks, time blurred, shifted into a rhythm unlike any Rapunzel had known. The prince remained hidden in her chamber, careful never to approach the windows where the witch's shadow might glimpse him. He asked her for stories of her childhood, but she had none before the tower. He told her instead of the world beyond, kingdoms of stone and steel, rivers that glittered with morning light, forests that sang with wind and wild things. She drank in his words like water, yet always the curse lurked, reminding her of its chains. Each dusk, the compulsion to sing clawed at her throat. She resisted, biting her tongue until blood filled her mouth, but the pain became unbearable. In the end, she sang, softly, mournfully, begging the wind not to carry her voice, but it carried anyway. Travellers came, as they always did, and Rapunzel felt the pull as her hair spilled down the tower, eager to ensnare. The prince held her as she wept, whispering that she was not guilty, that she was a victim too. Still, guilt gnawed at her, sharp and merciless. She began to dread the sound of footsteps at the tower's base. Each new climber was another ghost etched into her bones. But then came the day the prince made a discovery. He had been studying her hair, not the strands themselves, but the way they pulsed faintly when the curse stirred. One night, while Rapunzel slept fitfully, he pricked his finger and let a drop of blood fall onto the hair. The strands writhed. Rapunzel woke with a cry, clutching her head as fire lanced through her scalp. The prince rushed to her side, horrified, but she gasped, "No, don't stop. What did you do?" "My blood," he whispered. It reacted. Rapunzel's eyes widened. Blood. The witch had tied the curse with blood threads. If blood could bind, perhaps blood could unbind. The idea terrified her. If the prince's blood stirred the curse, what might his life be worth to it? Would it devour him whole, as it had all the others? The prince, however, seemed only emboldened. "This is the key," he said. "If I give enough, maybe it will weaken the curse. Maybe it will sever the bond between you and this prison." "No!" Rapunzel cried, gripping his arms. "You don't know what it wants. You could be feeding it." "Better me than you," he said simply. She wanted to scream at him, to beg him not to throw himself into the abyss, but his words silenced her, because part of her, the desperate, selfish part, wanted to let him try. That night, as she sang again, she thought she heard something different in the air. Not only the endless echo of her voice, but another note, deeper, resonant, stirring the clouds. The tower shivered around her, and for the first time she wondered if it was not invincible after all. Yet even as hope flickered, dread grew alongside it, because in her dreams that night she saw the witch, standing not in shadow, but in light, smiling with teeth too many for her mouth. "You may play with blood, little bird," the witch whispered in the dream, "but every binding has two ends. Pull too hard, and you may unmake yourself before you unmake me." Rapunzel woke with a scream, the prince's arms around her. Her hair slithered across the floor, restless, hungry, and she knew with sick certainty that the witch already knew what they were trying. They moved like conspirators beneath a sky that did not belong to them. For the prince, secrecy was less a danger than duty. He had slipped into Rapunzel's chamber with the quiet of someone who had learned how to listen to stone, soundless footfalls, a hand that navigated by memory rather than sight. For Rapunzel, every secret weighed like a new stone upon her sternum. She had kept them all so long that hoarding them had become second nature. But this was not hoarding, this was gambit. They began small. The prince gathered what the tower allowed, a shard of the chamber's broken mirror, a length of his cloak, the rusted spike from the shutter he had pried loose one rain-shadowed night. He had no scholar's library of arcane words, no priest's altar. He had only what a single man could carry into a prison chamber meant to never be entered, that and the blood in his arm. "I have heard of bindings tied with song and silver," the prince said, fingers busy, voice low as a wind in a cathedral. He knelt on the cold stone and arranged the mirror shard at an angle beneath a single coil of Rapunzel's hair. The glass caught the light of the guttering lamp and split it into 1,000 trembling sparks, but I also know that iron and blood are stubborn things. They answer different questions than soft voices do. Rapunzel watched. When he touched her hair, he did so with a ritual gentleness that made her skin prickle, as if the coils were a living animal and he a careful hand on its back. He did not treat the hair like rope, he treated it like something worth listening to. For that small humility, she loved him and hated herself for loving him. "Do you know what you do?" she asked. "I know enough," he said. "I know enough to try." He drew a small cut along his palm with the edge of his sword, the iron biting bright and quick. He gathered the blood and let it bead at her fingertip before he pressed it to the root of her hair, where it pooled like a river at the chimney of her skull. The reaction was immediate. The binding leapt like an animal startled into flame. Pain rolled through Rapunzel's throat and scalp, not the slow, guilty ache she had endured for years, but a hot, white lightning that spoke of the binding being touched. For an instant, she saw, not with her eyes, but behind them, the threads of the curse, red stitched lines braided with a darker filigree, a lattice that wound down into her ribs and spread like roots. Where the prince's blood touched, a single thread quivered. He did not pull away. He hummed a thin sound and placed another drop of blood at the hair's base. He pressed his forehead against Rapunzel's temple, anchoring both of them like a pledge. The mirror shard caught the candlelight, and they bent words together, not a liturgy of priests, but promises that tasted like salt and iron. The prince spoke vows to her hair, to her skin, to the thing beneath the skin that had been forced to sing for strangers. He vowed his life, being neither poetic nor naive. If this eats me, it eats me. If it spares you, then I have given enough. The words were small, and they fell into the hair like polished stones being laid upon a grave. The hair answered with movement. It twined around the prince's fingers and held, not like a rope, but like a hand that had discovered a wrist to claim. For the first time, Rapunzel felt the tug that was not obedience but cunning. The strand that held his wrist pulsed once, then twice, and loosened just enough for blood to bead at the skin beneath. They worked until dawn teased pale through the slit windows. The prince bled little, but often, making small sacrifices meant to prick only the edge of his life and not drain it. Each drop met the hair and made the tower shiver. They found a rhythm, the prince's blood, Rapunzel's whispered directions about the way the strands curled, the mirror to reflect the light back into the hair as though illuminating a wound, the iron of the sword's edge to nick but not to sever. It was not a ceremony from books, it was improvisation, a thicket of desperate bravery and ignorance, but within it, for a handful of breaths, They tasted something like triumph. The first victory was almost laughable in its modesty. A single braid, one stubborn lock that had always leaned toward the window, recoiled. It drew itself back from the stone as if scalded. Rapunzel gasped, a sound caught between sob and laugh. For the first time in years, the weight at the crown of her head felt less absolute. The thorny pain in her throat dulled, and she could draw a breath that was not instantly filched by the binding. "Did you see?" she whispered, incredulous. Her hands trembled on his arm. "Did you see?" He smiled, that quick, dangerous smile that had made her believe in impossible things. "I saw." He looked paler than he had been the night before. A dark circle bloomed on his palm where the blood had soaked, but his chin lifted. "It works. Not finished, not safe, but the tower does not forgive half-truths." The loosened strand shivered as though with cold, and then lashed. The motion was rapid, unnatural, a coiling that became a whip, an animal's flurry of limbs. A dozen strands rose like hands and wrapped themselves around the prince's torso. He did not cry out right away. He was made of stubbornness and had expected pain. He tightened his grip on Rapunzel's fingers and planted his feet like an anchor. But even the anchor can be dragged. The hare's grip was iron cold where it touched him. It dug under his garments, clenched at his ribs, and the prince felt it feel his life with the intimacy of a parasite. Blood beaded as the hair lashed at the skin, finding soft places to burn. He swore. The sound was animal and sharp. He drew the sword between the strands, not to cut, but to pry, and for a frightening moment, the blade caught the hair, and the hair caught the blade back, as if it had memory too, and remembered iron. Rapunzel screamed. The binding in her throat returned with a vengeance, as though the curse had discovered the treason, and lashed out through every nerve it could claim. Her hands shook until the mirror shard clipped the edge of the lamp and sent a scatter of sparks across the stone. A single ember rolled and hissed when it kissed the hair, and the hair recoiled at the sour scent of smoke like an animal offended. But the recoil did not free the prince. It gave him only a moment, a small, blistering aperture through which he could draw air, recompose, and shove. "Hold," he rasped, voice tight. His fingers worked on the knots the hair had formed, and Rapunzel leaned into him with all of her weight. They became a knot of human bodies and living locks, wrestling with the thing that had been coiled around her like a second skin. In that ache of physical struggle, something else happened behind the walls of the tower. The stones vibrated, not from wind or rain, but from a sound that was older than thunder, a low hunger that crawled along mortar and mortar like an insect. The tower registered what was happening and did not like it. "Quiet," Rapunzel whispered between clenched teeth. "It wakes." "Yes," he grunted as a thick braid bridged his throat and his vision darkened on the edges. "It feels blood. It tastes defiance." He pulled, and the hair pulled back. He pushed, and the hair pushed harder, more cunning, as though it had learned the way of steel and how to use it. For a breath they were balanced, two wills against a third, ancient will that had all the advantage of time. Then the balance tilted. A sound like a great bell struck somewhere above them. It was not a sound of metal, but of space folding, a chiming of the tower's appetite. Shadows deepened in the corners. The hair's pressure changed from grasp to hunger. It tightened around the prince's torso, as if to pull him through some invisible funnel. And for the first time, he felt the climb begin. Fingers that were not his own hauling at him, dragging him toward an unseen throat. "No!" Rapunzel snarled. She forgot her fear in that instant and became cold and hard. She clawed at the strands with both hands, ripping at them, teeth bared. Her nails bled. The hair resisted, then yielded, not because it was kind, but because the prince gave an obscene grunt and freed a shoulder. He fell to his knees, coughing and trying to find the breath that had been stolen. They lay there in the rumpled bed of hair and stone, heaving, while the tower settled like a brute, gone limp after a brief temper. It woke, the prince managed at last, voice raw. It felt my blood, it felt my choice, and it answered its learning. Rapunzel tasted copper in her mouth. Around them, hair settled. The strand that had recoiled now hung limp, still warm from the prince's touch, but not severed and not surrendered. She could feel the memory of the touch at her scalp, a small, stubborn heat that might be the beginning of a wound or the end of a chain. They slept in fits and starts until noon, bones aching, blood cooling on palms. The prince sat with a rag at a small bleeding nick and smiled foolishly when Rapunzel pressed a cool hand to his brow. "Do you regret it?" she asked. The question was sharp and small, like a shard. "Did you wish you had not bled?" He looked at her in a way that made her chest ache. "Would you rather I had remained coward and left you alone?" He made a face of mockery, but his eyes had that flinty set he wore when thinking of impossible things. "I would rather be foolish for you than prudent for my crown." Her throat tightened. "You could die. Then let me be a good death," he said. "Let me be a foolish one." The cottage of composure cracked, and they laughed, a little bitterly. And in that laughter there was a human sound that had not been in the chamber in years. The sound of two people who would not be owned by the same thing. But the tower keeps accounts. They had been careless, perhaps because hope makes hands sloppy, or perhaps because the curse had been asleep long and only half dreaming of dishes it had not yet eaten. Whatever the cause, their small triumph had radiated beyond them. Blood in certain places is a signal. It is a flare. It calls in more than the binding it sought to unweave. Rapunzel felt it first, as a stillness that settled over the chamber, like a hand laid over a mouth. The light in the mirror dimmed, though the sun still tried to fight through cloud. The hairs on her arms rose. Somewhere, far below the tower, a dog bayed and then was cut off. The wind dropped so completely that the candle flames feathered straight. She stepped to the slit window and looked down. At the base of the tower, a figure moved in a way she had not seen for seasons. Not a climber, not a villager, a shape that might have been a shadow until it shifted and revealed itself to be a woman wrapped in dark cloth. Rapunzel's breath stuttered. Gothel's silhouette stood with that stillness of complete menace, hands folded, head tipped, the way a predator does when it calculates a kill. Gothel, the prince whispered behind her as he came to stand in the gloom. He did not sound surprised. He sounded as if he had been expecting storms his whole life and only now saw them gather. She comes back. His fingers tightened in hers. Rapunzel's scalp prickled as if dozens of tiny hands were there to read her worry. She smells it, she said. She smells the blood. The witch did not need to be told, even as Rapunzel watched. Gothel lifted her face to the tower and laughed, a sound without mirth, a curl of scorn that rippled through the stones and made them shiver. Her lips moved, but Rapunzel could not hear the words from so high. The tower exhaled with a terrible, slow sound, like a mouth opening. They had not broken the binding. They had not broken the witch. They had only changed the rhythm of their captivity. In playing with the cords that held them, they had woken a thing that remembered how to hunt. And yet, the prince said softly, "We know something. We know the hair can be made to recoil. We know the tower reacts to blood differently than to song. We can use that." Rapunzel wanted to believe that with all the rawness in her chest. But when she looked at her hair, lying like a lived thing on the floor, she saw not promise, but teeth. The strand that had recoiled trembled as it lay, and somewhere in the house of her body, the thorned pain began to stir again, like a clock that had been restarted. Above them, in the unseen heights, where clouds met stone and the tower's throat opened into what no mortal name could hold, something shifted as if acknowledgement had been made. The tower was awake now, in a way it had not been for long, and its first action was never kind. Rapunzel wrapped her arms around the prince. They had stolen small victories from a huge impatient thing, and now they would face the consequence. The witch's figure at the tower's base lifted a hand and beckoned as if to say, "Come down. Show me what you thought to hide." The prince's jaw set. "Then we make ready," he said. "We make sure we do not stumble again." Rapunzel leaned into him and let herself feel the tremor of his body as if it were a compass. She did not know if the next step would free them or devour them both. She only knew that, for the first time, she had a choice that was not given to her by the witch, and that the price of making that choice might be the thing she loved most. Below, the witch smiled. Her lips were a seam of shadow, and her eyes were full of the patient cruelty of someone who had been waiting the whole time for a single misstep. They had learned how to wake her. The sight of Gothel at the tower's base clung to Rapunzel long after she vanished from the window. For a heartbeat, she thought perhaps the witch would linger there, a phantom silhouette carved into the dark. But then came the inevitable command, rasping up through the stones, as if the tower itself were her throat. "Sing for me, child." The words vibrated in Rapunzel's bones. The binding inside her throat roused with a terrible hunger, and before she could resist, before she could whisper any warning to the prince, the song was already spilling from her mouth. Her hair unfurled in a golden torrent, spilling down the wall like molten chains. Rapunzel gripped the window frame, dread making her arms stiff. "Hide," she hissed to the prince. "Behind the bed, quickly." He vanished into the shadows without a word, his movements swift but silent, honed by years of hunting in forests where noise meant death. He pressed himself into the corner just as the first tug ran through Rapunzel's scalp, the familiar ache, her very flesh being used as a ladder. Gothel climbed. Every inch she ascended was agony for Rapunzel, the roots of her hair burning as though ripped one by one from her skull. And yet she could not cry out. The binding stole her pain and forced her into stillness. She could only wait. Then the witch appeared at the window, dragging herself through with eerie strength, her cloak of shadows shedding the dust of her climb. She rose to her full height, skeletal yet commanding, and let her eyes roam the chamber. Rapunzel curtsied, every gesture stiff and practised. "Welcome, Mother Gothel." The witch smiled thinly. "Ah, my pet, your voice was weaker tonight. Have you grown tired of singing?" The binding thorns pricked Rapunzel's throat, forcing a reply. "Never, mother. I live only to obey." Gothel circled her slowly, like a wolf evaluating prey. Her hand rose and brushed against Rapunzel's braid, curling it through her fingers. "And yet I smell something strange." Her eyes narrowed. "Something warm, something alive." Rapunzel kept her gaze lowered, though her pulse hammered. She knows. She must not know. Gothel tilted her head, listening. "The tower murmurs to me when I am away. It told me of trembling. It told me of blood." She leaned close, her breath rancid with herbs and rot. "What have you been doing here, little one?" Rapunzel's scalp burned, as if the curse itself demanded truth. She fought it, biting the inside of her cheek until blood filled her mouth. "Nothing, mother. I have only sung as you commanded." The witch's smile grew cruel. "Lies do not suit you." She raised a nail, sharp as a pin, and traced it along Rapunzel's jaw. Perhaps you have spoken with someone. Perhaps you have let another hear your song. From the shadows, the prince tensed. Rapunzel dared not glance toward him. Her throat screamed with pressure, demanding she confess. But she clenched her teeth until she thought they would break. Gothel let her hand drop and turned toward the bed. For one breath, Rapunzel thought she would see him, thought it was all over, but instead the witch plucked at the quilt, lifting it disdainfully. "Dust," she murmured, "always dust. You never keep tidy." Relief threatened to buckle Rapunzel's knees. Gothel straightened again, her eyes like pits. "Do not test me, child. I know the scent of love when it festers. If you dare give your heart to another, I will cut it from your chest." The binding writhed in Rapunzel's throat, binding her silence. She could not even gasp. Satisfied with her terror, the witch moved to the window. "Continue your songs, and all will remain as it has always been." She grasped the braid once more and slipped out, vanishing into the night. The moment her weight left the hair, Rapunzel collapsed, clutching at her chest, as though she could tear the thorns out with her fingers. The silence in the chamber was unbearable. Then a hand, warm, gentle. The prince emerged from the shadows and knelt beside her. "Rapunzel," he whispered, anguish in his voice. "I thought she would—" "She suspects," Rapunzel said hoarsely. "The tower told her. It knows about the blood." The prince's jaw tightened. "Then we cannot wait. We must find a way to break it before she returns." Rapunzel raised her eyes to him, fear and love clashing in her chest. "If the tower wakes fully, if she discovers you, she will not stop with me." His hand brushed her cheek, steadying her. "Then we fight it together. Even if the tower swallows me whole, I will not let you face this binding alone." Her braid lay heavy across the floor between them. Rope, chain, weapon. Rapunzel looked at it and knew. Her heart already belonged to him. Whatever punishment the curse promised, she had already chosen. The days after Gothel's visit unravelled like threads, snagging against thorns. Rapunzel felt her scalp ache constantly, as though the witch's hand never really released her braid. Her throat burned too, as if the binding spell nestled inside it had been stirred awake by her rebellion with the prince. Every time she sang the command to lower her hair, she felt the words cut her from the inside, leaving her hoarse, bleeding invisibly. Gothel's threats echoed still. "I can cut the love from you as easily as a gardener prunes a rose." Rapunzel had believed once that Gothel only controlled her body. Now she realized the witch might reach deeper into her very self. The idea of losing her memory of the prince was worse than the curse, worse than endless climbing or eternal imprisonment. It meant losing proof that she was human at all. She began to hide her tears. The tower's stone walls had absorbed too many of her sorrows already. She refused to let it drink more. The prince did not come again for 3 days. When at last his hand touched the rope of her braid, she trembled with such relief that her knees gave way, and she collapsed in the window seat, nearly letting go. "Rapunzel," he whispered as he hauled himself inside. His voice was ragged, as though he had been shouting into winds or crying out in lonely forests. "Forgive me, I had to wait." The witch lingered, circling your prison like a hawk over prey. "You should not have risked it," she said, though she clutched his wrist as if to weld him to her side. "I would risk worse. I have been thinking of the blood and the braid." He knelt before her, unrolling a satchel. Inside were small vials, shards of iron scraped from horseshoes, and a coil of rosary beads, glimmering with tarnished silver. "I believe your curse can be undone. If blood and iron burned it once, then more, combined with sacred words, might sever it altogether." Her heart pounded. "And if it severs me?" The prince did not answer at first. His brow furrowed, his eyes heavy with unshed fear. "Then I stay with you regardless," he said at last. "If it takes your hair, your voice, your very shadow, then I will hold to whatever remains." She wanted to believe, yet she remembered the tower's roar when the braid recoiled last time, like an animal denied its meal. She remembered the way the walls had groaned, as though they might shatter or close in on them both. Still, hope was more intoxicating than terror. They began their experiments again, in secret. Each night the prince climbed, bringing herbs, holy oils, small charms begged from roadside priests or stolen from shrines. Each time Rapunzel steeled herself, lowering her hair willingly, not to lure but to test. The binding resisted fiercely. The first night, when the prince traced a line of his blood across one golden strand, it writhed like a living snake. Rapunzel shrieked as if her own veins were seared, clutching her skull with both hands, until she nearly pulled the braid from her scalp. The tower shook so violently that dust fell from the rafters, coating them in grey. The second night, they wrapped iron wire around a lock. The hair blackened instantly, curling like burned parchment. Rapunzel gagged, her throat filling with a bitter metallic taste. The prince had to tear it free before it scorched them both. The third night, they tried prayer. Rapunzel repeated words the prince had learned from monks, syllables meant to banish demons. Her tongue blistered. She choked, unable to breathe, her body convulsing, as if unseen fingers were squeezing her windpipe. The binding had been written in shadows, deeper than prayer could pierce, yet every attempt left behind something small but undeniable. Resistance. The hair recoiled, the tower trembled, the curse strained against itself. "You are weakening it," the prince insisted, holding her after each torment. "Every wound leaves a mark. We will break it, Rapunzel. I swear it." But Rapunzel's heart grew heavier, for though the curse strained, it also retaliated. Each morning she awoke weaker, her hair dragging across the floor like chains of lead. The shadows of the tower seemed thicker, the air heavier, and always she heard whispers in the stone, murmurs in a voice that was half Gothel's and half her own, urging her to obey, to sing, to surrender. On the fourth night, she told the prince, "If I weaken, promise me you will not let her take me alive. Promise me you will end it before she cuts the love from me." The prince looked as though she had struck him. "Rapunzel, promise." His hand tightened around hers. At length he nodded, eyes wet. "I promise." The promise haunted him more than it comforted her, for Gothel came again. She came at dusk, when the sky bruised purple and the forest swayed with long shadows. Rapunzel had not yet sung the summons. Still, her throat convulsed, forcing the song out unbidden. Her braid fell, writhing like a serpent, and Gothel ascended, her weight pressing into every nerve of Rapunzel's scalp. The witch climbed inside and surveyed the chamber with a hawk's glare. "You smell of iron," she hissed, "of ash and blood. Have you been meddling, my rose?" Rapunzel lowered her gaze, but her voice quivered as she said, "Only the dust of the tower, nothing more." Gothel's lips curled. She crossed the room in 2 strides, seizing Rapunzel's chin with fingers cold as bone. "You lie poorly. Do you think I cannot feel it? The binding is mine, child. When it strains, I feel the tug as though my own hair were pulled. Who climbs your braid, Rapunzel? Who scratches at my tower's bones?" Rapunzel shook her head, fighting tears. The binding surged in her throat, burning her for the half-truth. She wanted to cry out the prince's name, but terror held her. Gothel studied her a long while, eyes gleaming like glass-catching firelight. At last, she released her and paced the chamber. "Perhaps," she murmured, "it is time you learned the purpose of your curse. You think your tower a prison. Foolish child, it is a mouth. The hair, the climb, the song, all teeth to drag souls into its belly. Every man who climbs and vanishes feeds it, feeds you. That is why your skin glows, why your youth never fades. You are not prisoner, you are bait and banquet both." Rapunzel's stomach lurched. She remembered the tingling warmth after each climber vanished, the unnatural shine in her skin. She thought it the cruelty of isolation. Now she knew it was hunger wearing her flesh. Gothel leaned close. "And if ever you betray me, Rapunzel, I will not cut your hair. I will cut the prince. I have seen him in the woods. He thinks his prayers and blood hide him from me, but his scent is on you. One snip of his soul, and you will be emptied forever." Rapunzel gasped. "Please," Gothel smiled. "Sing sweetly, my rose. Feed the tower. That is all you were made for." With that, she descended, leaving Rapunzel trembling in a silence thicker than stone. That night, Rapunzel told the prince everything. She confessed that the tower was a mouth, that she had fed it unknowingly, that Gothel threatened his very life. The prince listened without fear, though his knuckles were white around his sword's hilt. Then we know the truth. The tower is not only cursed, it is alive, and like all living things, it can die. Rapunzel wanted to believe, yet when she lay beside him on the cold stone floor, her hair pooling around them both like a golden shroud, she felt the whispers of the tower thrumming in her skull. Sing, Rapunzel, lower the braid, feed me. She clutched the prince tighter. The endless climb had always consumed strangers. Now she feared it hungered for the only one she loved. Rapunzel did not sleep that night. She lay against the prince's shoulder, her eyes wide and glassy, listening to the tower breathe. She had never heard it before, not truly, but now, after Gothel's revelation, every creak of stone, every groan of timber, sounded like the labouring chest of a monstrous body. The walls pulsed faintly, as if with blood. When the wind pushed through the high window, it no longer whispered, it rasped like breath through teeth. By dawn, she could no longer ignore it. She rose, hair dragging behind her, and pressed her hand to the wall. Warmth thrummed beneath her palm, steady and slow, like the beat of a buried heart. The prince awoke to find her trembling. He pulled her away from the wall, as if it might devour her hand. "Don't touch it," he said, his voice low. "It was always there," Rapunzel whispered. "I was just too afraid to feel it. The tower is alive, and I am its tongue." The prince's jaw tightened. "Then we silence it." That day he ventured into the forest to gather what he claimed were final ingredients. Rapunzel waited by the window, her braid coiled like a golden snake across the floor, anxiety winding through her gut. Each hour stretched like a year. The whispers in the stone grew bolder. "He will not return. You will sing for me again. You will lower the braid. You will feed me." When at last she saw him emerge from the trees, her heart nearly burst. But he was not alone. A woman followed at a distance, a stooped figure cloaked in grey. Rapunzel's stomach turned cold. Even from far away, she recognized Gothel's walk, the slow, patient glide of a predator who never needed to hurry. The prince did not see her. He strode with determined steps, arms laden with bundles of herbs, jars and scraps of iron. He was already calling for Rapunzel when she realized what must be done. She pressed her hand to her throat, feeling the binding stir. Her voice rose, cracking, but the words spilled out like blood. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." The braid slithered over the sill, a golden coil unrolling endlessly, shimmering in the setting sun. The prince's face lit when he saw it. He grasped the rope of hair, braced himself, and began to climb. But Gothel was close now, too close. "Faster!" Rapunzel hissed. She strained every muscle, pulling upward with all her might. Her scalp tore with pain, as though the tower were resisting her. She dragged him upward, her vision going black at the edges, desperate to get him inside before Gothel arrived. At last, his hand caught the window ledge. She hauled him through, collapsing against him with sobs of relief. But outside, the braid still dangled, and Gothel's hand had found it. The tug nearly ripped Rapunzel's scalp from her skull. She shrieked, clutching at the roots of her hair, feeling each strand burn as Gothel began to climb. The pull was merciless, stronger than any man's. The prince grabbed a knife from his satchel. "Rapunzel, we can cut it." "No," she gasped. "If you sever it, the curse will tear through me. I'll die before she does." The window rattled as Gothel drew nearer. Already, her voice wafted up the braid, cold and lilting. "My rose, my traitorous little songbird, did you think you could hide him from me?" The prince turned to Rapunzel, his face grim. "Then we must make the tower choke." He spilled the contents of his satchel onto the floor. Iron shards, silver beads, bloodied cloth. From another pouch, he drew a flask of oil and a bundle of dried herbs, sharp and bitter smelling. "Help me bind it," he ordered. Rapunzel, though half blind with pain, obeyed. Together they wound the braid with iron and silver, smeared it with blood, and doused it in oil. The hair writhed, twisting like a living rope, trying to fling the bindings off. But Rapunzel held fast, even as her throat scorched with the curse's fury. Gothel climbed nearer. Her hands would touch the window any moment. "Now," the prince said, voice tight. He struck flint, and flame blossomed. The braid ignited. Rapunzel screamed. The fire raced through her hair, searing her scalp, filling the tower with the stench of burning flesh and oil. But the tower howled too, a deep, guttural roar that shook the stones. The walls rippled like muscle, and the floor lurched beneath them. Outside, Gothel shrieked. For the first time, Rapunzel heard pain in the witch's voice. The prince dragged Rapunzel back from the window as the braid burned away, curling into blackened ash. The last thing they saw was Gothel's face rising in the smoke, eyes blazing, mouth split in a snarl, as the fire consumed the rope and sent her plunging into the forest below. Silence fell. Rapunzel lay gasping, her head raw, her scalp blistered. Half her hair lay charred across the floor, smoking like coals. The rest hung in ragged lengths down her back, uneven, broken. The prince cradled her, pressing cloth to her burns, whispering, "It's done. She's gone. She cannot climb again." But Rapunzel knew better. The tower still throbbed beneath them, alive and furious. The whispers returned harsher, no longer coaxing, but commanding. "Sing, feed me, bring her back, bring anyone. You are mine." Rapunzel's lips trembled. She wanted to defy it, but the binding surged, wringing her lungs until she choked. Blood flecked her lips. The prince held her tighter. "We will not obey. Do you hear me? We will starve it." But Rapunzel could see the truth in the stone walls, in the blackened ash of her braid. The tower was starving already, and it would not go quietly. The next nights were worse. The tower grew restless. Rats fled, spiders shriveled, moths dropped dead in the corners. The air thickened, heavy with rot. The stairs groaned, though no one climbed them. And Rapunzel began to change. Her hair grew back at a monstrous pace, golden strands sprouting overnight to replace what had burned. But they were darker now, streaked with black, heavy as iron chains. When she brushed them, sparks leapt between her fingers, as if the hair carried a charge. Worse, she felt hunger gnawing inside her, not for food, but for something nameless, terrible. At night, she dreamed of climbing men, of their hands scraping her braid, of their bodies vanishing into the tower's maw. She awoke with her mouth wet, as though she had swallowed them herself. The prince noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands shook. "It's the binding," he said, pacing in frustration. "It's turning on you. It knows we're trying to kill it." She pressed her hands over her ears, but the whispers bled through her skull. Sing, feed, obey. And always, beneath the tower's voice, she thought she heard Gothel's laughter. On the 7th night, after the burning, the prince made his decision. "I cannot fight this with scraps and charms. I need steel, fire, men who can strike at the foundation itself. If we bring down the tower, we bring down the curse." Rapunzel's blood ran cold. "Leave me here, alone." His hand cupped her face, steady and fierce. "Only for days. I will return with help, and then we end this, once and for all." She wanted to beg him not to go, but the words turned to ash on her tongue. He was right. He could not fight this with prayers and beads, and she was too weak to resist alone. She kissed him instead, tasting salt and fear. "Come back," she whispered. "No matter what you find me as, come back." He swore it. Then he climbed down, vanishing into the black forest. Rapunzel stood at the window long after, her ragged hair fluttering like banners in the wind. She thought she saw shadows gathering where Gothel had fallen, thought she heard laughter in the trees, and when she turned back to the tower, she realized the walls were no longer whispering. They were humming, low and steady, like a throat preparing to sing through her own. The endless climb was awakening. Rapunzel sat curled in the window's stone cradle, hair sprawled across the floor like a sea of molten gold streaked black, her body frail as parchment, yet her mind was not her own. The binding had sunk deep into her marrow, twisting her thoughts into hunger. At times she found herself reaching for her braid, half ready to sing, to let it fall and lure some faceless stranger to climb. The tower urged her constantly, "Sing, lower, feed," and beneath its chant, She heard Gothel's voice, lilting and cruel. You are my rose, my banquet, my bait. You cannot be anything else. Rapunzel clawed her ears until they bled, but still the whispers remained. Nights stretched into days, days into nights. She marked their passage only by the worsening of her reflection. Her hair grew without end, heavier each morning, dragging her neck until it bent. Her skin glowed faintly in the dark, a phosphorescence stolen from all those who had climbed and vanished. And her eyes had begun to flicker with a faint golden light, like the windows of the tower itself. The line between prison and prisoner was blurring. On the fourth dawn without the prince, Rapunzel heard the crunch of boots on leaves. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She staggered to the window, clutching fistfuls of hair, and there, emerging from the forest, was the prince, scarred by brambles, but alive, sword at his side, torch strapped across his back. Behind him came 6 men, armoured in chain and leather, axes glinting. Hope and terror rose in her at once. She wanted to scream in joy, but the binding surged, clawing at her throat. The tower wanted her to sing the old words, to let the braid fall, to drag them all into its maw. She bit her lip until blood ran down her chin. She would not. Instead she called, her voice raw. The tower lives! Strike its roots, not its stone. Burn what grows beneath. The prince lifted his gaze, met her eyes, and nodded. He had heard, he had believed, but before he could give the order, a shadow moved among the men. Gothel. Her cloak was singed, her skin blistered, yet she walked with the calm of one who had never known pain. Her hair, once black, now writhed with streaks of ash and ember, as though fire itself lived in it. The men faltered as she passed between them, their axes trembling in their hands. When she raised her face to the tower, Rapunzel's blood froze. Gothel's eyes burned gold, the same gold now flickering in Rapunzel's own. "My rose," she called sweetly. "Did you think fire could unmake me? I am older than flames. I am the root, the nail, the hunger in the stone, and you are mine." The binding coiled in Rapunzel's throat. She gagged, doubling over, as the command forced itself out of her mouth. Her braid slithered across the sill, unspooling like a serpent, hungry to be seized. "No!" she screamed, clutching at it, but the hair dragged itself free of her grasp, lowering toward the witch's waiting hands. The prince shouted, "Cut it, Rapunzel, now, before she climbs." But she knew cutting it would not free her. Cutting it would kill her. Gothel's hand closed on the braid. The pain was beyond bearing. Rapunzel shrieked, her back arching, scalp tearing, as Gothel began to climb. Each tug was a hook in her flesh. The binding rejoiced, pouring fire through her veins. The prince ran forward, hacking at the braid with his sword. Sparks leapt, strands severed, but each cut seared Rapunzel's body as if her skin were being flayed. She collapsed, writhing, sobbing. "Stop! It's killing me," Gothel laughed from below. "Yes, little bird, your hair is your life. Sever it, and you are nothing but ash in the wind. But if you let me climb, you may yet live, a vessel forever, feeding the tower as you were made to." The men with axes swung at the base of the tower. Their blades rang against stone that rippled like flesh. The tower groaned, a monstrous sound, and black sap bled from the cracks. But roots lashed up from the earth, gnarled tendrils of hair and bone that wrapped around the men's legs, dragging them screaming into the soil. The prince cut them free, slashing with desperate fury, but one was swallowed whole. The ground pulsed, drinking his life. Rapunzel felt it. Warmth bloomed in her belly, sickeningly sweet. She gagged, retching bile. The tower was feeding her again. She staggered to her feet, hair half burned, half blackened, still dangling with Gothel's weight. Her body swayed, half puppet, half prison. She realized then she was not just bound to the tower. She was the tower, every stone a bone, every root a vein, every song a mouth. The only way to end it was to end herself. The prince saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke. "No," he whispered, shaking his head, his sword lowering. Rapunzel stepped toward him, hair dragging like chains. Her hands trembled as she cupped his face. "You swore to me if it came to this. You promised. I promised to fight, not to lose you," he said, voice breaking. "There must be another way." "There isn't." Tears streaked her cheeks, each drop glowing faintly gold. "If she climbs, she takes me. If you cut the braid, I burn. If the tower feeds, I become it. There is only one way left, to starve it from within." Gothel's voice rose from the braid. "Foolish girl, even in death you are mine. Your bones will be mortar, your hair my roots, your voice the wind in my garden." Rapunzel pressed her forehead to the prince's. "Then let me choose it. Please, end it with me, before she owns me forever." The prince's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped his sword, but at last he nodded, tears falling. "I will stay with you until the last breath." "Then do it." He raised the blade. Gothel shrieked from the braid, sensing what was to come. The tower howled, the stones convulsing, the roots writhing. The bindings surged in Rapunzel's throat, trying to choke the words from her, but she forced them out anyway. "I am not your rose. I am not your song. I am not your banquet. I am Rapunzel." The prince's sword fell, the braid severed. Agony ripped through her like wildfire, every nerve ablaze. Her body arched, hair thrashing, light bursting from her eyes and mouth, as if her very soul were burning free. The tower screamed with her. its stones cracking, its roots shrivelling. Gothel's voice rose in fury, then in terror, then in silence, as she was dragged down into the collapsing earth. Rapunzel's body dissolved into gold dust, scattering like embers on the wind. Her last sight was the prince's face, streaked with tears, whispering her name. Then all went still. When the dust settled, the tower was gone. Only a blackened scar remained where roots had burrowed deep. The forest stood silent, as though holding its breath. The prince knelt in the ashes, clutching a single lock of hair that had not burned away, gold, untouched, soft as sunlight. He wept until his throat bled, but no voice answered him. And yet, when the wind stirred, he thought he heard a faint echo, a song carried not by the tower, but by the trees. Not binding, not hunger, just a name, Rapunzel.